Tonight, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev appears in court for the first time since the marathon bombings. Plus,
how you doing, Boston?
Why aging rock stars still have ageless appeal. And
it's been a remarkable window into Edith Wharton's intellectual life.
Owen in the Berkshires continues at the home of a literary giant, restored to full glory. That's now on Greater Boston. Good evening. Media and onlookers started arriving at the Moakley Federal Courthouse on the waterfront early this morning, anticipating the arrival of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the surviving marathon bombing suspect who was formally arraigned this afternoon. Driven in a white van with tinted windows, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev arrived at the Moakley Courthouse this morning around 11 o'clock under the heaviest of security. Later in the afternoon, an MIT shuttle pulled up and over a dozen MIT police officers stepped out, creating a thin blue line in solidarity with slain MIT officer Sean Collier. Inside the courtroom, Tsarnaev appeared disheveled, wearing an orange jumpsuit and a bandage on his left hand. As the 30 federal charges were read out, Tsarnaev, in his own voice, pled not guilty to all counts. Judge Marianne Bowler set another court appearance for September 23rd. And with that, the arraignment was over. Tsarnaev blew a kiss to his family as he was escorted out. Observers say he never once looked at the victims assembled in the courtroom. And joining me are Adam Riley, who is in the court this afternoon, and former U.S. Attorney Donald Stern. So people were saying that it looks like he hadn't had his hair cut in the 3 months since he was picked up, that he was kind of disheveled and kept wiping his mouth. What were you noticing?
Yeah, I mean, the hair certainly struck you as soon as he walked out. It was this, incredibly poofy, unkempt, looked like he'd been asleep until 5 minutes earlier and just rolled out of bed to come to the arraignment. I thought he looked, and I was in the media room. Philip Martin from WGBH was the one who made it into the courtroom itself. So I was in the media room where our vantage point was straight ahead looking at Tsarnaev, sort of the way the judge would be. From that vantage point, I thought he looked dazed and confused, fidgety. There was a lot of, rubbing his face, rubbing that bandage or cast on his arm, looking around, looking from side to side, kind of going like that. He looked antsy. I don't know what to make of that. I wondered if he was trying to show that he, wasn't overly affected by the drama of what was going on, like it was no big deal. You could also infer from the same behaviors that he was absolutely terrified out of his mind. One person pointed out to me when I was throwing out some theories on Twitter that he could have a brain injury. That's one thing I should make sure to notice. The left side of his face was very puffy and dragging down. He almost looked like he'd had a stroke. So that makes you wonder whether there might be some medical explanation for this twitchiness.
Well, Don, wouldn't the feds make a special effort to clean him up, or can't they force him to have a haircut? I mean, why would they let him appear like that?
No, I don't think they can't force him to have a haircut. It isn't like force feeding somebody at Guantanamo. he's got a right if he wants to come in with a ponytail and long hair, whatever. That's his choice. My guess is that his lawyers, sometimes the lawyers will persuade their client to clean up a bit. Here, it may be, frankly, quote, in his interest, and it may be consistent with his lawyer's eventual approach to this case that he doesn't look quite cleaned up.
So 30 charges are read in court today. Many of those come with the death penalty. Who signs off on that? How does it get decided? Because I remember when Judge Wolf did it in the Gary Lee Sampson case, but is it the administration that does it? How does it work?
Well, it's actually a very specific procedure set out by Congress, in that it is the Attorney General, one person, the Attorney General of the United States, who does it for all federal death penalty eligible cases around the country. And the theory is that in response to the unfairness or the perceived unfairness of death penalty cases, Texas does it one way, Massachusetts doesn't do it, is you put authority in one person in the Department of Justice, and that's the Attorney General. Now, having said that, there's a very specific procedure that's followed within the department. It's set out in a written document. The U.S. Attorney's Office will make a recommendation. It's not typically public, and then it goes to a committee, a so-called capital committee within the Department of Justice, composed of senior career attorneys in the Department of Justice, and that committee will make a recommendation to the Attorney General.
And they decide before trial, right?
Oh, be decided well before trial, because the defense theory will be different depending upon whether it's a death case or not.
One point worth mentioning when you talk about the charges that he pled guilty to is that he...
Not guilty.
Thank you. Thank you for that correction. Real time, instant correction. The charges he pled not guilty to, his attorney, Judy Clark, attempted to enter a not guilty plea for him. And the judge said, actually, I'd like to have him speak. And Don was talking before the show began, actually, about the legal rationale for that, which is worth mentioning.
You know, I think that the judge probably had two things in mind, both of them related. One is it's another assurance that he's competent, you know, rather than that he understands. I suspect, although Adam didn't refer to that, there's usually a colloquy that the judge goes through. Are you taking drugs? Did you have a chance to talk to your lawyer? There's usually a colloquy in advance of that. The other thing is avoiding any, reduces the likelihood that there'll be an attack later on. You know, you don't want a defendant coming in and saying, well, I would have done it differently if I had the opportunity, but my lawyer wouldn't let me speak.
I also wanted to make sure to highlight, sorry to talk over you, but the atmosphere around the court was incredibly dramatic. And it was all, I mean, the best comparison I can make was what it was like after the marathon bombings themselves, when it felt like the city was on lockdown. There was a huge law enforcement presence. We saw the MIT police officers arrayed on that medium, but there were Department of Homeland Security personnel everywhere, Boston police letting in his motorcade and allowing it to exit. And then at least 3 helicopters, there might have been more, in the air, just stationary above the vicinity around the Moakley, hovering. At the courtroom, you know, before the arraignment began, there were people from the U.S. Marshals coming in to sweep it, to make sure it was secure. So it was an incredibly intense, electric feel in and around the courthouse.
All right, so we think those were members of his family, some of them wearing scarves on their heads and things like that. One was carrying a young child. There were families of the victims that were in there. And then there were also this odd group of people wearing these T-shirts that say, you know, "Free the Lion," and with pictures of Dzhokhar and a lion. And then people say Dzhokhar is innocent. Now, first of all, I'm going to ask you, is it okay to allow people wearing that kind of paraphernalia into a courtroom? Can you tell people that it's inappropriate?
You know, without a jury, probably the judge was thinking that she would allow it. I think once the jury is impaneled, usually judges make sure you can't wear buttons, you can't wear T-shirts of support. So I think the rules will change once there's a jury impaneled.
And who are these wingnuts anyway?
Well, I talked to one young woman who told me that she is actually the creator of the Free the Lion T-shirts. Like you said, it says Free the Lion in great big letters, has a huge picture, I think, which may be from his Facebook page or Twitter page, I can't remember, but a huge picture of a lion with a smaller picture of Dzhokhar himself down underneath, and then today's date. And she told me, this was a young woman, she was wearing a white headscarf. She told me she was friends with some of Tsarnaev's friends and that she just doesn't believe the evidence against him. She doesn't believe he's guilty. I asked her for an example, and she said, well, you know, there's an image that they put out of him leaving the scene of the marathon bombings without a backpack, with the thinking being that, you know, he put his backpack down and it was a bomb. She told me, well, that image was sent away for analysis. She didn't tell me where. It was sent away for analysis, and they learned it was photoshopped. So, but, you know, as we were talking about a little bit ago, I think someone like that, they're going to think he's innocent, even if he ends up in a twist, standing up in court and saying, yes, I did it, and here's the reasons why. They'll say he was brainwashed or coerced or whatever. So they may take off the T-shirts, but I think they'll probably be with us for much of the trial.
I mean, it is disturbing because you didn't have people on the opposite side saying, you know, kill them. Bastard.
Well, you know, I didn't. There may have been people who were thinking that. You know, I didn't have a chance to talk to everyone in line. There was one gentleman who was wearing actually a Boston Marathon T-shirt, who one other reporter told me he was turned away from the public line.
I heard that too. Yeah.
I don't know if he was turned away or not. I saw him walking away looking very frustrated, and I don't know the circumstances behind that.
Now, do they in court today? Do they have a witness list? Do they know? Do they have that kind of stuff?
No, it's much too early. I understand, looking at things online, that the government said that the trial would be 3 or 4 months. That they would be
probably not for another 2 years, though.
Well, not for a long time, but it's much too early to really.
As you were saying, 80 to 100 witnesses.
80 to 100 witnesses. So no, it's probably a year or more away from the government or the defense having to give their witness list.
Which in a way is sort of a shame because, you know, I think a lot of us maybe who weren't directly affected by the marathon bombings have been able to experience them receding a little bit, and you know, this dredges it all back up again. Obviously, for some
Boy,
people, it
imagine
hasn't
the way it is for
receded
the
at
people
all.
in the Whitey Bulger trial.
Well, that's very true.
You know,
and again,
they've waited 30 years.
That's true.
Or more.
Right. That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But I want you sometimes you wonder how much it helps the healing.
It's
and how
always
much
this
it
way.
hinders.
It's always 2 years out.
You know, the one of the first motions that probably the defense team will file will be to move the trial, and that's going to be a hotly contested motion. In an ironic way, just listening to Adam describe, the less electric and more calm the scene seems at the courthouse, the more likely I think the judge is to keep it in Boston.
Okay, all right. Don Stern, Adam Royley, thanks so much. All right, and before we go, this correction from last night's broadcast. We reported that one-time mobster Kevin Weeks witnessed the murder of Deborah Davis, a one-time girlfriend of mobster Stephen Fleming. But according to Weeks, that's incorrect. He never met Deborah Davis and only knew of her murder through Whitey Bulger.